Good, 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 good. Good evening, everybody. This is Kiana. I'm your host. And tonight we are going to be discussing the Daniel Penny verdict. That's right. We are going to be discussing that verdict that came out of New York. But before we do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and shares, and of course, if you subscribe to this channel, what that does is that pushes the video up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm, excuse me, the algorithm that these videos are important. But just because these videos don't move up in the algorithm does not mean that they are not important. So let's go ahead and get into the topic for this evening. So, about an hour ago, I got wind that Daniel Penny was found not guilty. Now, I knew that this was going to be the verdict. I saw this right from the very start. And I'll tell you why. Well, first, we understand that in situations where there is a Black person that is unalived by someone in the dominant society, that really never really goes good for that Black person. So, what do I mean by that? Oftentimes, what happens is that when there is a lot of media attention on the extrajudicial and arbitrary execution, then the media feels forced, the United States government feels forced to actually bring charges against that assailant. When there is not a consistent flow of attention on these human rights violations, then that gives, of course, the United States time and the defense time to clear way for the assailant, which happened in the Daniel Penny case. So to peel back the layers of this even further, we understood that when Daniel Penny unalived Jordan Neely on the New York subway, I don't think that he was initially arrested. He was taken in for questioning, but he wasn't initially arrested. When there was a lot of media attention on this unalivement in public space, what happened next was the US felt obligated. And so when I'm talking about the US, I'm talking about as a collective, all states together. And so this isn't just isolated to New York. This has to do with a pattern and a practice in the United States as a whole. And so the United States felt it had an obligation to arrest Daniel Penny. And that was irrespective of whether or not it felt that that was really the action that it was supposed to be taking in cases of this sort. And so I want you to kind of think about that for a moment and to reflect on that, how oftentimes when we are looking at these cases, when we're looking at arbitrary executions in public space, whether that's by a vigilante, whether that's by law enforcement, what often happens, to reiterate, is that the assailant is not arrested. And only when there is enough public scrutiny or public attention on these human rights violations do we see an arrest. Am I loud? Let's see. No? Okay. Because I saw someone that's over there, and so they kind of looked. So I was wondering, can they hear me? Okay, so let's resume. And so I want you to really think about that for a moment and to really reflect on it. And so as I reflect on it, the first thing that comes to mind is, why didn't the prosecution, why didn't the family continue to put pressure on not only the US government, but also media for its condemnation of Jordan Neely. So let's get into that. So the title of this video is Did the United States Media Help Acquit Daniel Penny? And my argument is yes. And the evidence I have for that is as follows. Throughout this entire time, since Jordan Neely was unalived last year to the acquittal, the United States media has been in unison in its coverage of the Jordan Neely um, trial and how it represents Jordan Neely versus Daniel Penny. So, as I said last year, which happened throughout this year, is that what the United States media did was it actually it it, it used the halo effect when it was referencing Daniel Penny the entire time. So in the media, you didn't hear any references to that this was a man that unalived another man in public space. He would all the references to Daniel Penny were always positive. So they were saying this is a former Marine, the Good Samaritan, the Daniel Penny was saying that he was doing a good deed. He was looking out for everyone's best interest. He was trying to protect everyone. He was the savior. And so this was consistent in the media's coverage and its depiction of Daniel Penny. They didn't actually waver from this kind of coverage. And again, it was continuous. Whereas when they would refer to Jordan Neely, it would be the horn effect. So everything about Jordan Neely was negative. He was homeless. So basically they were saying that Jordan Neely was a homeless man. Jordan Neely was a person who had sickle cell anemia. They were saying the media was saying that Jordan Neely was uh, a man who had a mental health condition. Jordan Neely was uh, what else did they say? I think that they said something else. But so everything that there was an accumulation of negative attributes that they were attributing to Jordan Neely. Jordan Neely he had been hospitalized and he was in a um, mental institution for quite some time, is what they would say. Just a moment, let me turn the light back on. And they would continue to say, so they would reference this, right? They would say that every reference was something negative. It was something negative about criminal history. It was something negative about homelessness. It was something negative about mental acuity, mental state. It was something negative about perceptions, homelessness. And I knew that this was going to be the verdict. And that's not me saying, oh, I told you so. But, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned in several videos, sometimes we, I understand, and I'm talking to minorities and I'm talking to Black America. Sometimes I know, I understand that if your family member is suffering from or actually dealing with, I won't say suffering from, but actually dealing with a mental health condition, most of the time in the United States, what's going to happen is that, especially if the person is a Black American, is that, okay, let's take a step back because I think I jumped the gun. So let's take a step back. what we've seen in this what this what this verdict tells us, ladies and gentlemen, is that the the reasons for Daniel Penny's acquittal are the reasons that your loved one could be the next person who is unalived. And so what do I mean by that? And that this is not, I want to be clear, this is not propaganda. This isn't an incitement to hate. This isn't an incitement to violence. So I'll have to break this down. When Black Americans in the United States, especially those who are suffering from some form of malady, a mental health condition, there is one particular mental health condition that the uh, psychiatric community turns to. And that mental health condition, we don't need to say it on camera, but we understand that that was used in the Jordan Neely trial. And so, what did they say during that trial? What did the defense say? So, the defense said that Jordan Neely, when he walked on the subway, he was destined for this execution. And it wasn't really about the execution. So basically, the defense's argument was that really Daniel Penny didn't need to actually unalive Jordan Neely on the subway. That was about to happen anyway, because one, Jordan Neely had K2 in his system. The defense alleges. Two, the defense alleges that Jordan Neely had sickle cell anemia. And three, the defense alleged that Jordan Neely was suffering from this mental health condition that they often are attaching to Black Americans. So when they say when these things are viewed in its totality, when it's viewed together, that one could conclude that Jordan Neely was going to, his life was going to end anyway. And essentially, that's what they were saying. They were saying that no, this chokehold didn't kill Jordan Neely. It was all these other factors that were at play. And so I say that, ladies and gentlemen, I bring that to your attention for one, to let you know that it is time, if you are a Black American, you're living in, if you are living in the United States or even abroad, it's time to step away from these mental illnesses. And what I mean by that it's time to put a partition between your family, your loved ones, and psychiatry. And this is not my saying that I am in, I'm anti-psychiatry. No, I'm not. I'm saying until that there is equity and equality in psychiatry and until it's not used as a weapon, then Black Americans, you need to be, this is a dangerous time to be in. And you need to be very wary of saying that you yourself have a mental illness, a psychiatric illness, and that someone that you love has a psychiatric illness. Because as we've seen with the Daniel Penny trial, that specific psychiatric illness was used against him. And what happened there, ladies and gentlemen, just think about it. What happened there was that Daniel Penny was acquitted based on that information. And so let's refer back to the subway. What happened on the subway? So Jordan Neely walked on the subway and he was quite agitated and he was pacing back and forth. He was saying that he was hungry and he was thirsty, and maybe he came up to someone. That I don't see any video of that, so I can't confirm that detail. So that's alleged. But what we do know is that there was a reaction to Jordan Neely's presence on the subway. And that reaction was that someone felt that it was Their they felt it was their position that they had the authority to go up behind Jordan Neely and choke him until there was no breath or life within him. And that's quite unfortunate. But what we do know about this case, as we've seen with most cases in the United States, that when there is an unalivement of a black person by someone in the dominant society, is that we see quite frequently that there is a two-tier system, that there are double standards, and that, ladies and gentlemen, you would never ever see a black person in the United States feeling that he was a good Samaritan in a similar situation, doing the same thing to a homeless person that was white, and the jury find that person not guilty. That's just unheard of. And so, what do we learn from this case? Well, first, what we learn from this case is one, is that there needs to reiterate, Black America, there needs to be a partition right now because it's not going to get any better. There needs to be a partition between Black Americans and the reliance or the over reliance on psychiatry. Until there is an equitable, as I will reiterate, until there is an equitable system of justice in the United States as it relates to psychiatry and as it relates to the criminal justice system, as it relates to the civil system, we need to partition ourselves from such institutions. And so I'm sitting in here in Belfast, I was watching that verdict, and I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed, but I wasn't at all surprised. I knew that that was going to be the verdict. And so the family is disappointed. The Neely family is disappointed with the verdict, and rightfully so. But ladies and gentlemen, is it time to is it time? This is a real question that deserves contemplation. There has been many human rights scholars and academics who have written extensively on police brutality and the unalivement of Black Americans by vigilantes in the United States, and how that constitutes crimes against humanity. Is it time that there is a group of Black lawyers coming together to say this is not okay? So this is what this is going to take. It's going to take Black politicians, it's going to take Black lawyers, human rights defenders, it's going to take Black organizations in the United States to come together and say, you know what, this is not okay. And since there isn't any justice within the United States, we need to take our complaints abroad. We need to take it internationally. We need to take it to the Court of Justice. We need to take it to the International Criminal Court. We need to take it to the Human Rights Commission. This is probably going to be the only way that these extrajudicial executions are going to stop. We already know that they're not going to stop within the domestic jurisdiction because, one, we have, I think, the Republicans have a hold of the House, and I think they're closely holding tight to the Senate. They already have the US Supreme Court, which is the court of last resort in the United States of America. The United States is not a party to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So even if, let's say, for instance, we were dissatisfied with the judgments coming out of the US Supreme Court, we could not take a complaint to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, despite that being within our jurisdiction. And so the question remains is that, are we tired of this happening? And if we are tired, when are we going to actually try and get an effective remedy at an at the international human rights level is the question. I'm so afraid for Jordan Neely's family. And I know that some people will argue, well, where was his family at the time that he was on the subway? And why wasn't, you know, where were they then? Why weren't they helping him? Why didn't they give him a place to live? Why didn't they give him food to eat? And those questions aren't to be disregarded. Those are some legitimate questions. But even if we ask those questions, that does not mean that a person deserves to die the way that Jordan Neely died. Everyone has the right to life, and the right to life is inviolable. And it's one of the most sacred rights that we have because it is one of the rights that allows us to really, um, put into effect, realize, and to actually enjoy other human rights. And so without the right to life, without being able to live, we are not going to be able to enjoy other rights, such as the right to eat, the right to drink, the right to love. Of course, that's not a human right, but just kind of the right of participation, cultural participation, the right, um, of course, all these other rights, such as, the right to participate politically. And so, not to say that that was what Jordan Neely was trying to do, but of course, this is a human right that he could have enjoyed. And so, I don't think that in this, I don't think that it was a fair judgment. I don't think that this judgment is in line with international human rights law, and I don't think it's aligned with international human rights principles in general. So let's really just kind of look at the case one more time. Jordan Neely stepped on the subway, and he was quite. Just a moment. I'm sorry. Jordan Neely stepped on the subway, and he was frustrated, hungry, thirsty. And that frustration came out the wrong way. And so when we are looking at the person, I think a reasonable person understanding the situation of a homeless person, someone who hasn't been able to bathe, somebody who hasn't been able to have a drink or be able to eat. They're in New York, so it's probably cold. I mean, that was during May time, so probably that time wasn't cold. But just saying, like, people are judging you on how probably if you smell, or they're judging you on your appearance and the things that you say. A reasonable, prudent person probably would conclude that the outburst that Jordan Neely had on the subway, what else could we expect from him? So for example, if I walk on the subway, or if you walk on the subway, so we can walk on the subway. And if we feel hungry and we feel thirsty, maybe that is something that we're going to keep inside to ourselves, like, and perhaps like we're quiet about it, and we are not going to make such an outburst, right? And that's not to say that we're more civilized than Jordan Neely. That's not the argument that making. What I'm saying is that we're holding Jordan Neely to the standard of a person who is not in the situation that he found himself in, and that is unfair. And so holding him to the same standard as an ordinary person walking on the subway allowed for a verdict as we seem to happen. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that the media is partly to blame for this verdict, because the entire time, as I said earlier, the entire time the media was bashing Jordan Neely in the press, all you would turn on and you would hear glowing reviews about Daniel Penny several times over, and all the coverage that you would hear about Jordan Neely was always negative. And so when you have this positive coverage versus this negative coverage, you are not going to expect a different verdict than what we have seen coming out of New York this afternoon. And so I think that that's just something to reflect on. Um, and also, in my personal opinion, I don't only think that the media wasn't the only entity that contributed to this not guilty verdict. The alphabet agencies were likely involved as well. I mean, let's be honest. Daniel Penny was a Marine. And so this isn't coming from me. This is coming from the media. They're telling us over and over and over, hey, this is a Marine. This is somebody who is served in the United States Marines. This is somebody who is served for the state. And so it raises the question as to whether Daniel Penny could we view the actions, could we attribute the actions of Daniel Penny to the state? Because this was a person who was very knowledgeable about chokeholds and kept a man in a chokehold for over 5 minutes and didn't stop when subway goers, patrons were saying, "Hey, release him." And despite the evidence that subway goers were like, "Okay, you can release him now. Like, we got him. You can release like the chokehold." Despite that, he didn't release the chokehold. He kept his arm around Jordan Neely's neck. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is a test case that is now precedent. And now that this case is something that other courts can build off of, it's quite frightening. So as I said earlier, now I'm afraid for the Sonia Massey. I'm afraid for Sonia Massey's family. And maybe the burden of proof is more in this case because it was a law enforcement officer who used a firearm, right? Which was, we're looking at this as unjustified and irrational. But so did we look at the chokehold. We looked at the chokehold as unjustified and irrational, and look what happened. The verdict came back not guilty, as it always does. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's more that this case tells us. That it's not the Republicans and it's not the Democrats. This isn't a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. America has a problem with racism. America has a problem with holding the dominant society to account. We can't hide from that. And when we're being beat up about acknowledging that, that really cements that fact. To say it again, America has a problem with racism, and it has a problem with holding the dominant society to account. And when the United States persecutes us because we understand that that is so, then what it does is it cements that fact. It cements it. Now, years ago, I left the United States because I'm starting to view the United States as a relationship that is unhealthy. And so, what do I mean by that? Have you ever been in a relationship with a man or a woman or anyone in between, and that relationship is toxic and that relationship is unhealthy, and you just wanna get out of it? You wanna start off new, you wanna meet somebody else, and you just wanna build a life with somebody else because you don't want that toxicity anymore, you don't wanna be fighting anymore, you don't want to deal with that kind of narcissism in a relationship anymore, you don't wanna deal with that kind of oppression anymore, right? I think this is how I'm starting to look at the United States, is that there is a very United States is a very toxic partner to be in a relationship with. And sometimes we have to divorce ourselves from the United States. And and like most relationships, sometimes when you are trying to get away from a very toxic partner, that partner will want to hold you captive in prison, even though they don't want to, they don't want anyone else to have you. And so building on the philosophy and possibly like just mainly just the philosophy about relationships, what we come to understand is that I personally feel that sometimes you have to break away from something that is not doing you any good. Now, there is the argument that that Black Americans should stay within the United States and live to fight another day, and that is fight peacefully and to fight through the courts. And sometimes that can be exhausting because look at what we seen today is that there was trust in the judicial system, and the judicial system let a Black family down. And so should we stay and fight another day? Well, yes, I think some people would stay in the United States and continue to fight and continue to try and win. And then perhaps this is just a hegemonic argument. Maybe sometimes people just or maybe it could be a hegemonic argument where people just want to stay. And really, they're okay with how things are, and maybe they look at it as, well, that was a problem that happened with them, and, that doesn't have anything to do with so that happened with that problem happened with A, it doesn't have anything to do with B, and they're comfortable with being in a situation like that. But for those that aren't comfortable, those who are tired of the political oppression, tired of the racialized violence day in and day out. Is it time to leave the United States? That is only an answer that that's only a question that you can answer yourself. And so I sit here in another country and I am not well off because I know that the tentacles of the United States are right here within the nation that I'm currently in. And so in order to have true emancipation from emancipation, excuse me, emancipation, emancipation, in order to have true emancipation from the United States, one would have to go to the US's enemies, and most of us don't want to do that because we we would rather be in a democracy. We would rather be in a country where there is excuse me. We would rather be in a democracy and not be in a country where we are committing treason by being in the United States's uh, adversary's home, right? But is that the only way to get justice? And this goes back to the question of like, what is justice? How can one get it? How can one achieve it? And so, in this Daniel Penny case, we understand that he was found not guilty. So they can't bring any charges against him. They can't bring any other charges against him. What time is it? Okay. So this is it. And the family is saying that they're going to file a civil suit against Daniel Penny. And I think that that's not going to be successful either. Because we understand that sometimes when there is a not guilty verdict, that means that the person didn't do uh, that's a legal argument that the person didn't do the crime that they have been charged with. And so what the defendant will do in a civil case is reference that verdict and say, "Hey, the judge threw out the first charge. The jury found him not guilty. So what is the reason why this family is bringing this case against Daniel Penny?" That case is probably gonna be thrown out as yeah, they're probably gonna file summary judgment on that civil suit very quickly. Probably, what is it? There's a lot that they could do, but one of the things that they're gonna do is motion for summary judgment I think it's 12b6, where they actually throw the case out altogether. What is that? Let's see. Is that 12b6 motion? Hold on. Yeah, the motion to dismiss standard 12b6 altogether. And so I think it's gonna be very difficult, and of course, I'm not rooting against the family. I'm rooting for the family to get justice, whether that's civilly. We know that unfortunately they didn't get justice criminally, but I'm rooting for them to get justice civilly. But they need to be strategic about the way that they're going to actually file this lawsuit. And one of the things that they are probably they can't. One of the things they cannot do is they can't rely on what is it? A Section 1983 claim is probably what they're going to rely on. You can't you can't rely on that. You can't rely on like wrongful death wrongful death claim. You have to pull in international law and say, "Hey, Jordan Neely had a right to life." And irrespective of whether or not he was on the train and he was combative and he was pacing back and forth, and he may have, frightened people on the train with his verbiage, his speech. He didn't put his hands on anyone. He didn't touch anyone. And even though he said that he was felt that he was going to, I don't know what the argument could be, but I think that if I was the lawyer in the case, I would actually my entire complaint, or even just like a brief to support that complaint, would be most international law, international law, international law. And I know that in the United States is exceptional, and that it's very rare that international law is applicable to the United States. But I think that there's one case, I think it's Medellin, which is one of the cases that is applicable to the United States case law. Medellin. Hold on. Medellin case, United States. Yeah, so it's a case, Medellin, Medellin, Medellin versus Texas, I believe. And that case, there was some, in that case, it went to the US Supreme Court, and there were some references to international law in that case. And I think that that was like one of the um, landmark cases that actually put international law into jurisprudence within the United States. Not saying that international law wasn't in earlier jurisprudence. We know that it was. There was other standards, but this was one case where like the court really reasoned and thought very um, it really considered the arguments of international law, and really considered like the case law. And so I think that that would probably be my strategy, is to really rely on international human rights law in this civil appeal. Like, I would probably want to submit a brief, in amicus, um, am amicus, it's pronounced both ways, so amicus, brief in support of this particular case, arguing the right to life. I'll see if I can try and do that. I don't know if the United States will let me. They'll probably block it, on the internet, so block me from being able to actually submit it. But it's really something to think about. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know. This is very disconcerting, to say the least. Very, very disconcerting. To our second issue, we know that there is a case that is also coming out of New York. It deals with a United Healthcare worker that was unalived by a vigilante. And I guess this is the theme for tonight, is vigilantism, and how they are getting away with the M word. And we see that one vigilante got away with the M word in the Jordan Neely case. He got found not guilty, and so he got away with it. And now we have a vigilante on the loose in New York who unalived a United Healthcare CEO, and they can't find him anywhere. Like, he's nowhere to be found. And it raises the question as to, are we surveilling the right people? Are we surveilling the right people? How is it that you have a man who was in close proximity to the CEO, unalived him early in the morning, and days later, he still can't be found? Now, there was a picture that was released by New York Police Department or New York State, and it looked as if the perpetrator was in the back of a police car, and I think that that is to in my personal opinion, and I could be wrong, so this is not me stating that this is so, but the the image looked like it was AI generated. And it looked as if it was a image to play on our excuse me, to shape our opinions and our beliefs that this perpetrator is already arrested or he is contained, he's already found. Because again, if you look at that image, it looks as if he is in the back of a police car. And so the mind, when it looks at an image like that, you automatically think, okay, they've already arrested this man. He's contained. We don't have to worry about him. He's not out running around. When that's really not the case. He has not been arrested yet. He is still out there. And what he did to that man, now I know a lot of people disagree with the insurance industry, and I would probably be one of those people that really do disagree with the insurance industry as well. But what you don't do is you don't take a person's life because you disagree with this industry. Now, I'm not going to speak too much on this case because there are a lot of facts we don't know about it. We don't know the person's motive. We don't know why this person decided to unalive this CEO. We don't know why that is. Now, some argue that this um, this healthcare agency, United Healthcare, has been denying a lot of people's claims, which is resulting in a lot of people being unalived. And so there is that argument there as, okay, is this similar to what we see in the Daniel Penny case? Like, was this vigilante trying to protect y- a lot of people who are clients of, excuse me, is it clients or their customers of this, or perhaps a client, right? Um, of this United Healthcare industry. Was this vigilante trying to protect all of those innocent patients? And if so, like, is the verdict going to be the same that we see in the Jordan Neely case? It's something to really think about. It's something to really contemplate on. And again, I am always going to stand against the taking of a life when that life is unjustly taken. I don't believe that that is the right action to take. Again, if you've been following me, you know there are a lot of things about me. I'm anti-war, I'm anti-gun, I'm anti-violence. And so when I see cases like this, like I automatically feel very strongly against the action that is being taken. But I think at this point, I think it's safe to say that the United States has a has a problem with vigilantism. We've seen this in the United Healthcare case. We've seen this in the Jordan Neely case with Daniel Penny. We've seen this with Kyle Rittenhouse. We've seen this in so many cases. We've seen this with George Zimmerman. This is like, a pattern and a practice of vigilantism in the United States. And when you think not only Kyle Ritten, was it? Yeah, it was Kyle Rittenhouse. It was okay, and I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of other cases as well. And this would probably be a good research topic to do, like vigilantism in the United States and how, certain people get away with the M word. So, would this be something that I would research? Probably in the future, I would, because there's a pattern and a practice, and it's happening too frequently. It's happening too frequently. And so there we have it. We have, I've been talking too much. My voice is starting to go. But so what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is we have, of course, the verdict in the Daniel Penny case is something that I just totally disagree with. And I think that human rights advocates, I think that not only human rights advocates, but also human rights lawyers. Now is the time. Now is the time for human rights advocates and lawyers. It's time to start building a case against the United States and taking that case abroad. And before I end this video, I would want to do a call to action to the United States that United States, it's time for you to change your ways. This has been going on long enough and people are suffering. And I know that you have it in you to be a phenomenal leader. I know that you have it in you to be the best that can lead not only the United States, but to lead the world to peace, lead the world to a more just and equitable place. But when you are not following in your own footsteps, when you are not actually practicing what you preach, then what that does is that is a sign to the rest of the world that they don't have to do it as well. And so when you commit a very large human rights violation, then the world says, okay, the United States is doing it. So we should be doing it as well. If the United States can get away with it, we can get away with it. And because you are the big brother of the world, because you are, or actually more so like the grandfather of the world, and everybody is looking at you as a wise, a sageous person, right? A person, what is it? Sagacious? Is it sagacious? Sagacious person, I think it is. Yeah, sagacious. Everybody's looking at you as a sagacious person, or not necessarily a person, but a sagacious state, in a sagacious entity. I think that it's time for you to lead by example. And the first step that you could take is to right the wrongs. There has been inequitable situations in the United States for long as we can remember, especially when it has to do with Black Americans. And we are suffering in the nation. And it's time for you to right this wrong. And it's time for you to really come into power. Now you are in power. You've come into power. You've come into power. But the way that you're leading is coercively. So your power is coercive, and most other nations are afraid of you, and most other nations are afraid that if they don't do what you say, that they're going to be the next to be unalived. And that probably works with foreign policy, but when it comes to actually building bonds and building networks and leading, uh, being very principled in And leading by example, sometimes the way you lead by example is not by fear. It's with trust, it's with humanity, it's with uh treating everyone as if they are equal. And I think it's time that we see this come out of the United States. This is your year, United States. This is your year to turn the curtains, excuse me, to turn the table and to change things to where we now see like the United States that want everyone thinks that you could be. And what I think that you can be is you could be a really good nation that is not oppressive to your neighbors, that you are not treating your allies differently than you are doing your adversaries, that you are a nation that you are fair and you speak out against human rights violations no matter who is doing it. And you are cleaning your own backyard, making sure that your own nation is not committing these acts of human rights violations so that you can speak, so you can lead by example. I think it's time for us to see that United States. It's something that I know that you can be, something that I know that you can do. And I can't wait to see you do it. And I think that we all want that from you. And I know that I do. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is gone on long enough. And if you have any questions about this video, don't forget to send me a response in the description. I know that I kind of, went on a tangent and this wasn't really a structured video, but I just had to get this, talk about this because this verdict came out. And so just let me know what you think. Do you think that the verdict was just? Do you think that Daniel Penny should have been found not guilty as he did? Or as he was, or do you think that he should have actually there should have been a guilty verdict coming down from the court? Let me know, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.